guys, welcome back to my channel, the best place to be wherever you are on your wealth journey right now. Today I wanted to talk about the house buying process, particularly if you're a first-time buyer. If you've never bought a property before, obviously this is a really exciting time, but it can also feel quite overwhelming. People kind of expect you to know about how all this stuff works, but if you've never done it before, then how do you know? You've probably got all sorts of questions about what happens and when, so today I'm going to talk you through it. Before you even start looking at property, it's a really good idea to get yourself a good mortgage broker so that you have a good idea of how much you can borrow. How much you borrow will depend on things like how much you earn per month and also how much you spend per month. I did a full in-depth video on the mortgage process, which I'll pop just up here for you. So do watch that one straight after this video because I'm not going to talk in depth about mortgages in this one. So do have a watch because that is going to cover a lot of the stuff that you might have questions about after this video. Now your mortgage broker is going to look at your details, your income and your expenses, as well as assessing how much you have for a deposit, and will give you a guideline as to how much you can offer on a property. The reason we want to get our finance organised first is because when we make an offer on the property, the estate agent will usually want to see what we call proof of funds. And that basically means that you need to show them your deposit and the fact that you've potentially got a mortgage in place. Once the estate agent has proof of funds, they will then be able to take the property off the market. Otherwise, other people are going to still be able to view it. It also shows the vendor, that's the seller of the property, that you're serious about purchasing. Another thing to think about before you start the buying process is who is going to act for you in terms of a solicitor. You'll need to appoint a solicitor to do your conveyancing for you. Conveyancing is basically the legal transfer of a property from one person or entity to another. So whether you're buying an existing property from Mr. and Mrs. Smith, let's say, or you're buying a brand new property from a larger developer, you'll still need a conveyancer. If you don't know a conveyancer, it's a really good idea to speak to your mortgage broker again. Some mortgage lenders sometimes throw in a free conveyancing package if you use their services, but even if they don't, your mortgage broker does this often enough that they should be able to recommend you somebody. Once you've got the okay from your mortgage broker, you can then start looking at property. So start arranging some viewings, go and have a look. You can go and have a look more than once as well if you want to. And what I would normally recommend is to go and have a look at it. And then if you want to take somebody else back with you, let's say a parent or friend or family member, you can do that and you can bounce some ideas around with them. I would also say as well to sleep on it. Don't make a rash decision, go and have a look at it for 5 minutes and then suddenly make an offer. It's always a good idea to sleep on it overnight just to make sure that it's the right thing to do. I remember when I was buying this particular property and we wanted to obviously live here, this is our main home, and I wasn't keen. I didn't like it when I first went to see it, but my husband and my mum both absolutely loved it. And for me, I went to bed one night about 3 days later, pinged awake about 2 o'clock in the morning and thought, I've made a terrible mistake, we must buy that house, it's really good, it's got everything we want. Obviously the converse is true as well, so it might be that you're sleeping on it and you suddenly think to yourself, oh, I wish I hadn't made the offer on that property, I'd rather not do it. And if you change your mind, that's perfectly okay at any stage of the buying process, right up until you exchange contracts. And I'll talk about exchange of contracts a little bit later, but that's basically the point of no return. Before then, you can decide whether you want to buy it or you don't, and you can pull out if you want to. I would say on that to keep checking in with yourself regularly. You'll know if the purchase is right for you because it will feel right in here. Frustratingly, your vendor can also pull out of the purchase at any time up until exchange of contracts. And this is why it's important to try and do things as quickly as you can during the process to keep them sweet. Once you've made your offer and the vendor is happy to accept it, the estate agent will normally ask you for that proof of funds document. And all that is a copy of your bank statement just showing that your deposit is in your bank account. You don't need your mortgage organised by that point, but the estate agent will ask you who your mortgage broker is so that they can just verify with them that something is in progress. You should also give your estate agent the solicitor details as well. Once they've got those and everybody's happy, the estate agent will then write to both you and the vendor just to confirm the sale price agreed. Once you've had a phone call from the estate agent to say, yep, Mr. and Mrs. Smith have accepted your offer, then it's time to get the ball rolling. Contact your mortgage broker and your solicitor and let them both know the full address of the property that you're buying and the purchase price as well. At this point, your solicitor will normally send you a welcome pack or similar documents just to sign to say that you're happy to use their services. And the pack will usually include their terms and conditions as well. Once your solicitor has received your signed instructions, they'll then get in touch with the vendor's solicitor and ask for further information about the property. I will say that the conveyancing process can be really frustrating at times, so it might be that you're tearing your hair out, but don't worry about it. I would say if you haven't heard from your solicitor within a 5-day working week, then definitely get in touch with them to find out what the state of play is, just to make sure everything's okay. But do be prepared to chase your solicitor if things are moving very slowly. There are a couple of important things your solicitor has to do during the conveyancing process, and they are, first of all, to get the searches back on the property, and second of all, to get the replies to their inquiries. Now, what do both of those terms mean? Well, the searches on the property are something that your solicitor will send off for. They include local searches, drainage and water searches, and environmental searches. Local searches will include things like any land registry details, planning permission on both the property itself and the surrounding area. It will tell you who owns the roads around the property and whether there's any plans for any new road or railways around the property as well. Drainage and water searches will tell you all about where the sewers and water mains are around your property, and expressly that they don't run underneath your property. That's not really something you want. The environmental search will tell you about the ground underneath your property, so particularly whether it's prone to subsidence, because you definitely don't want your house sinking into the ground, whether the land it's built on could be considered contaminated land, and whether there's any risk of your house being flooded either by rivers, seas or surface water. If there is anything untoward that comes up during the searches, your solicitor will flag it up and have a conversation with you about it, because it may well affect your decision to buy the property. So for example, if your solicitor calls you and says that yes, the property is prone to flooding, then you might want to think twice about buying that property. It would certainly have a knock-on impact on your building's insurance, for example. So that's a bit about the searches. The inquiries that your solicitor needs replies to are things that they're going to be asking the vendor. So it's things that we don't know about the property already, and it's things that don't necessarily come up in searches. So it'll be things like, what is the vendor leaving behind in the property? Are they leaving carpets, curtains, white goods? What exactly are they doing? Are they going to service the boiler before you move in? Who are the utilities with at the moment? If it's a flat or a leasehold property, how much are the service charges and ground rents per year? And who owns the freehold, and is the ground rent likely to increase over time? Those are just some examples, but the inquiries can also include anything that your solicitor deems appropriate to the purchase. Now, it's quite normal for that to be a fairly long process, and generally the searches and the inquiries will come back usually in around 2 to 3 weeks, but sometimes it can be a little bit longer than that. Thinking about the inquiries that your solicitor will raise, it's a good idea as you're walking around the property to have a look and see whether there's any questions that you want to ask them. So anything that you're not sure about, or you just have questions around, ask your solicitor and they can find out from the vendor's solicitor for you. You can always ask your estate agent, but they might not know the answer to the question that you have, so going through your solicitor is normally the best course of action. Now, while all the searches and inquiries and everything are going on, your mortgage broker will be working behind the scenes to get your mortgage organised for you, which is why it's important that you watch the mortgage video to see exactly what you need to do in that respect as well. I'll pop a link to the mortgage video in the description just underneath this video too. Now, one of the biggest questions that we always get at the start of the purchase process is, how long is this going to take? And the answer very much is, it depends. If you're buying a new build property from a developer, for example, it might be that the property hasn't been built yet, or if it has started to be built, it might not be finished. The builder may say, oh yes, it will be ready in a couple of months, but I have yet to meet anybody whose builder has actually managed to complete on time. So I would always add a couple of months extra just to give yourself a little bit of leeway there. Invariably, builders do get delayed, and obviously if it happens any sooner than that, then happy days. If you're buying an empty property, let's say from a vendor who is selling on behalf of a deceased family member, or it might be a landlord who's selling up, then it might be that the process is quite quick, so potentially 6 to 8 weeks, if not faster. Because in that scenario, there's only you and them involved in the transaction, there's nobody else around. The process becomes lengthy when there's more than just the two of you involved. So let's say, for example, that you're buying your house from Mr. and Mrs. Smith, and Mr. and Mrs. Smith are retiring. They've decided they want to move to a bungalow. Now, that bungalow is currently owned by Mrs. Jones, and Mrs. Jones has decided that she wants to sell her bungalow because she wants to move to a purpose-built retirement block in the centre of town. Now we have what we call a chain. So the chain here involves 3 people. It involves you at the bottom end, it involves Mr. and Mrs. Smith, who are selling their house to you, and it involves Mrs. Jones, who is selling her bungalow to Mr. and Mrs. Smith. And it also technically involves the builder as well that Mrs. Jones is buying from too. So it might be that the chain might be 2 or 3 or 4 properties like this, or it might be that the chain is much, much bigger. I remember when I was an estate agent, the longest chain I ever dealt with was 16 different properties, and that was really difficult because somewhere down the chain people kept pulling out and then finding something else to buy, and everything chopped and changed, and it became quite a lengthy process. The longer the chain, the longer it will be for you to actually complete on the property. If we look at our example with Mr. and Mrs. Smith and Mrs. Jones, in this scenario, it's very much going to depend on when the developer can complete Mrs. Jones's property, because when she wants to move to her flat, and she can only do that once it's been built. So a lot of your chain at the moment is then reliant on that builder finishing that flat for Mrs. Jones. So often with things like that, you need to be a little bit patient and just give everybody a little bit of leeway sometimes. I will say that when you're in a chain like this one, it's actually really good to be a first-time buyer at the bottom end, because it means that you've got nothing to sell. If you had to sell your own property, for example, then you'd have somebody else further down the chain from you, and the chain would be even longer. So actually, being a first-time buyer puts you in a really good position, especially if you're buying from somebody who is moving house. So a top tip for you is when you're negotiating your property deal, let them know that you're a first-time buyer, that you have nothing else to sell, because that will stand you in very, very good stead, certainly if you're buying a house where someone's moving. You may need to be a little bit patient depending on what else is happening in your chain, but I will say that as long as you're playing ball and you're doing all the things you need to do and getting all your documents back on time to everybody that needs them, then that will stand you in really good stead. I will say as well, it's a really good idea to try not to book any holidays while you're going through this process, and I am serious about that, because there is nothing more frustrating than your mortgage broker suddenly saying, oh, your mortgage lender needs this, and you're not there to actually go and get that thing for them. That can kind of delay everything by about a week or so. So just be aware of that and try and book your holiday maybe for after you've completed the property. Obviously the mortgage process can hold things up a little bit as well, and I do extensively cover that in the other video, so do make sure that you watch that one too. Another thing that you'll need to do during your purchasing process is to organise some buildings and probably some contents insurance for the property as well. As part of your mortgage process, a valuer acting on behalf of the mortgage lender will go into the property and create what we call a valuation report. So they'll look at the property, they'll say how many bedrooms it has, what's the property built from, is it brick, is it tiled roof, that kind of thing. They'll put everything together and they'll make sure that it's worth what you're buying it for. But the other value that they'll put on the property is for what we call the rebuild cost. That means that if the property falls down, how much would it actually cost to rebuild the property? Now that rebuild valuation usually forms the basis of your buildings insurance here. So if you're not sure what it is, just ask your mortgage broker, get them to confirm when the valuation comes back and let you know exactly what the rebuild cost is, because you can then take it to your insurance broker, and when they ask you about it, you can give them all the details and they'll base your insurance on that. When you're getting your buildings insurance, it is really important to be honest with your insurance broker. Earlier on I gave you an example of what happens if the property floods, and I said it might well impact your buildings insurance. If you have had a search back and your solicitor has said to you, oh, the property is prone to flooding, you must let your insurance broker know, because otherwise it may invalidate your buildings insurance. Contents insurance is also quite helpful as well. The way that I would define contents insurance is if you take your house and you turn it upside down and shake it, anything that falls out of the house is contents. And that includes things like carpets. With the contents, your insurance broker will guide you as to what exactly you want covered, because it can also include personal items like laptops, mobile phones, jewellery and so on, but it will also include things like carpets and flooring. Now a long time ago I made a mistake in the early days of my property journey. I didn't get any contents insurance on a particular property, and I thought that the carpet, because obviously if you shake a property, everything that falls out, the carpet doesn't fall out, does it? Because there's grippers all the way around and it's stuck in. But actually your carpet is contents, and I didn't realise that until I had a leak, and the toilet leaked, the cistern, and it went down the toilet underneath the lino and out onto the landing, and the carpet there got completely saturated and it ruined the carpet. And I contacted the insurance company and I said, oh, I'm really sorry, Mrs. Fennion, but you can't claim on the insurance here because you haven't got contents insurance, you've only got buildings insurance, and that doesn't cover the carpets. So be aware of that. That's just a cautionary tale for you. Don't do what I did. Of your buildings insurance and your contents insurance, your buildings insurance is the most important one, the one that's based on the rebuild value. Normally, your mortgage lender will put a stipulation on the mortgage offer that they will need to see a copy of your policy documents before they issue the offer, just to make sure that you've got your buildings insurance in place. So once you get a copy of your policy documents, make sure that you send them to both your mortgage broker and to your solicitor as well, because they will want to double check too. Once your mortgage lender has everything they need, they will issue a copy of your mortgage offer, and they'll send a copy to your mortgage broker and also one to your solicitor as well. Once your solicitor has that and they've received the replies to the inquiries and the searches as well, then they're pretty much ready to exchange contracts by this point. And they'll usually either invite you to their office to sign your documents, or they'll pop them in an email for you to sign and return to them. Exchange of contracts is a big date. It's the point of no return. When you exchange contracts, your solicitor will usually send 10% of the purchase money across to the vendor's solicitor. So your solicitor will normally contact you a few days before that just to say to you, please could you send over all of your deposit money. So you need to transfer your deposit, and your solicitor will then hold on to all of that deposit money for you until the completion date, at which point they will then disperse all the funds for you. So you don't have to worry about paying the vendor or anything like that. Your solicitor does it all for you. The rest of the purchase money, including the mortgage and everything, that all gets paid on the day of completion. Once you've exchanged contracts, that big day, you are then legally obliged to complete on the property. Failure to complete on the property after exchange of contracts can involve then hefty fines and potentially even court proceedings as well. Exchange of contracts is normally about a week before completion, although you can actually exchange and complete on the same day if you want to. I've done that several times in the past, but I will say, particularly if you're completing on your main home, it is nice to have a bit of a gap between exchange and completion. It gives you a little bit of breathing space, and it also enables you to organise things like people to help you move house and so on, because you've now got a firm moving date. Once your solicitor has exchanged contracts, they'll then contact you and give you the good news and confirm your completion date with you. On the day of completion, your solicitor will organise for the mortgage money and the rest of your deposit to be sent across to the vendor's solicitor, and at that point you will have completed the property. Hurrah! Your solicitor will normally ring you to let you know the good news, and at that point you can go and collect the keys from the estate agent. It is worth noting here that your completion may happen at any time on the completion date. I've had them as early as 10 o'clock in the morning and been able to go and get my keys then. Normally it happens around about midday, but the latest I've ever had was 5 o'clock, just as everybody was going home, and I was beginning to panic because I thought, oh goodness, what if it's not happening? So what I would recommend is that if you haven't heard from your solicitor by, let's say, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, definitely give them a ring to give them a chase to find out what's happening with everything, just in case there is some kind of hold up. The majority of completions also happen on a Friday. This is because people like to move just before the weekend, because it gives you the Saturday and Sunday to get yourself organised and get yourself moved and sorted. Technically though, completion can happen on any day of the week, so talk to your solicitor about what would be best for you and for the vendor if they're moving house as well. You would already have agreed your completion date with your solicitor before you even exchange contracts. After you've completed on the property, your solicitor will send you a completion statement, which is basically like a receipt. It has the details of all the funds involved in the transaction, who those funds were paid to, and it also includes their own fees as well. Your mortgage broker will at this point, if they haven't already, send you what we call a suitability letter. This confirms all the details of the mortgage and the product that you got with which particular lender, and confirms that you're happy with everything. You'll need to sign a copy of this and send it back to your mortgage broker for their records. One final thing to mention is that you're going to receive loads of documents relating to your purchase at all different stages of this process. So it's a really good idea to get yourself a folder to keep everything in. For me personally, I like to use this particular type of file, which is like a kind of booklet. It's just like a foolscap wallet, and it has little metal bits in the middle so that I can keep everything nice and safely. But if you haven't got one of those, you might just want to use a normal kind of document wallet, just like this one. Or you can just use a ring binder, whatever works for you. So I do hope you found this video useful, guys. Do drop me a comment underneath. Have you found this useful, or are there some other things that you still have questions about? I'd love to know about that. Do also have a watch of these two videos up next, because they will hopefully help with your wealth journey, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done that yet. Thanks ever so much for watching this week, guys. Do stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one.